"We don't hire poor people," mocked the boss, until his daughter stands up and says, "Hi, honey." Richard Sullivan was determined to humiliate another poor candidate when the young man entered the meeting room with his simple clothes and resume in his hands. The businessman didn't even look the young man in the eye before starting to pour out a series of insults about his humble origins and appearance. It was then that the door suddenly opened and Madison, his 25-year-old daughter, hurried into the room. Upon seeing the young man standing there, she stopped completely, her eyes widening in surprise and her hands beginning to tremble visibly. "Hi, honey," she said in a whisper, unable to hide the shock in her voice. The silence that took over the room was deafening. Richard felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. Brandon, the young candidate, was also frozen, not knowing how to react to the unexpected situation. "What did you say?" Richard asked, his voice coming out more like a growl than a normal question. Madison realized what she had just done and tried to compose herself quickly, but it was already too late. The words had escaped her lips without her being able to control them. "Dad, I can explain," she stammered, her cheeks turning as red as the dress she was wearing. "Explain what exactly?" Richard rose from his chair, his face turning purple with anger. "How do you know this? This kid from the ghetto?" Brandon took a step forward, trying to protect Madison from her father's fury. "Mr. Sullivan, please, don't speak to your daughter like that. If you want to fight with someone, fight with me. Don't you dare tell me what to do, you punk." Richard slammed his fist on the glass table, causing the scattered papers to jump. "I want to know right now what's going on here." Madison took a deep breath, knowing there was no longer any way to hide the truth. For months she had lied to her father about where she spent her free afternoons, saying she was at the university when she was actually meeting Brandon in the small park in the neighborhood where he lived. "We met 4 months ago, Dad. I was doing volunteer work at the community center in the South Bronx, and that's where we met." "Volunteer work?" Richard laughed cruelly. "You told me you were taking graduate school courses." "I lied because I knew you wouldn't approve," Madison admitted, her tears beginning to stream down her face. Brandon watched the scene unfold before his eyes, feeling guilty for having put the woman he loved in that terrible situation. He had come only for the job interview, never imagining he would find Madison there. 4 months? Richard repeated, his voice becoming dangerously low. "You've been meeting in secret for 4 months. Dad, Brandon is a wonderful person. He has 2 jobs to support his mother and his 2 younger brothers. He's finishing business school in the evening and—" "I don't want to hear about this bum's qualities," Richard interrupted brutally. "I want to know why my daughter is getting involved with this kind of people." The door to the room opened again, and Jessica, Richard's personal secretary, entered without knocking. She had heard the shouting from the hallway and was worried. "Mr. Sullivan, the other candidates are waiting and—" "Cancel all the interviews," Richard yelled. "And call my wife now." Jessica ran out, frightened by her boss's tone. In all the years she had worked for him, she had never seen Richard so upset. Brandon tried to approach Madison, but Richard blocked his path. "Don't you dare get near my daughter." "Dad, stop this," Madison shouted, also standing up. "Brandon hasn't done anything wrong." "Nothing wrong?" Richard laughed bitterly. He seduced my only daughter, the heiress to my company. He deceived me by pretending to come here for an interview when in fact—" "Mr. Sullivan," Brandon interrupted, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "I came here in good faith for the job interview. I didn't know Madison was your daughter." "Liar." "It's true, Dad," Madison confirmed. "I never told him what our family's last name was or where you worked. We always met far away from here." Richard looked from one to the other, trying to process this information. Could it really have been a terrible coincidence? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Jennifer Sullivan arrived in the room a few minutes later, still breathless from running up the stairs. Jessica had only told her it was urgent and that it involved Madison. "What's going on here?" she asked, looking at the 3 people in the room and immediately sensing the tension in the air. "Your daughter has been dating this kid from the ghetto for months," Richard exploded, pointing at Brandon. Jennifer looked at Brandon, then at Madison, trying to understand the situation. Mom, I can explain, Madison began. There's nothing to explain. Richard interrupted her again. Either you end this nonsense right now, or you'll be disinherited. Do you understand? You'll never see another cent of my money. Richard, Jennifer scolded her husband, you can't do that. I can, and I will. I won't allow my daughter to be involved with this riffraff. Brandon felt his blood boil in his veins. He was tired of being humiliated. You can insult me all you want, but I won't allow you to talk about Madison like that. She is the most generous and kind-hearted person I've ever met, and she doesn't deserve to be treated this way by anyone, not even by her own father. How dare you? That's enough, Richard. Jennifer raised her voice, surprising everyone. You're being ridiculous. Richard looked at his wife with disbelief. Jennifer rarely opposed him, especially in front of strangers. Jennifer, stay out of this. I will not stay out of it, she replied firmly. Madison is my daughter too, and I won't stand by and watch you humiliate her like this. Madison looked at her mother with gratitude. It was rare to see Jennifer stand up to Richard, especially on important matters. Mom, thank you for defending me, but no need to thank me, my daughter. And you, Jennifer turned to Brandon. What's your name? Brandon Miller, ma'am. Brandon, please, have a seat. Let's talk like civilized people. Richard was furious to see his wife treating Brandon with courtesy. Jennifer, have you lost your mind? This punk has nothing to do with our family, and you get to decide that all by yourself. Jennifer retorted, her own emotions beginning to surface. You always think you can control everything and everyone in this house. The argument was escalating quickly. Madison moved closer to Brandon and took his hand, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by Richard. Madison, let go of that young man's hand immediately, he ordered. I won't let go, Dad. I love Brandon and he loves me too. Love? Richard laughed sarcastically. You think this dude knows what love is? He's only interested in your money. That's not true, Brandon protested. I didn't even know who Madison's family was. Of course you knew. You planned this whole thing. Dad, stop talking nonsense, Madison shouted, her tears now flowing freely down her face. Brandon never asked me about money or about our family. He didn't even know I had my own car. Jennifer watched her daughter defending the young man with such passion and remembered herself many years ago when she was just a sales clerk in a small store in the center of New York City. Richard, she said softly, do you remember how we met? What does that have to do with this situation? It has everything to do with it. Do you remember how your father reacted when he found out you were dating a poor sales clerk? Richard's face completely changed. It was a memory he had tried to bury decades ago. This is completely different, Jennifer. Is it really? She asked, moving closer to her husband. Didn't your father say exactly the same things you're saying now? That I was only interested in the family money? That I was a scammer? Richard fell silent, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Mom, Madison whispered, surprised. Were you poor when you met Dad? Jennifer nodded, tears also forming in her eyes. Very poor, my daughter. I worked at a clothing store in the garment district and earned minimum wage. I lived with my mother in a rented room in Chinatown. Jennifer, that was over 20 years ago, Richard tried to argue. So what? Has the prejudice changed? Has the humiliation changed? Jennifer was getting emotional. Have you forgotten how hard it was for us? How many people in your family treated me like I was invisible? Brandon listened to everything in silence, beginning to understand the family dynamic better. Madison squeezed his hand tighter, also discovering things about her own family she had never known. Dad, why did you never tell me this? Asked Madison. Richard ran his hand through his graying hair, visibly agitated. Because it wasn't important. It's in the past. It's not in the past, Jennifer exclaimed. You only forgot because now you have money and power. You forgot what it was like to be looked down on because of your social class. It's different, Jennifer. I had potential, I had an education, You had what? She interrupted. You were unemployed when we met. You had just been fired from your third company in 2 years. Madison looked at her father with wide eyes. This version of the story was completely new to her. Is that true, Dad? Richard didn't answer, but his expression confirmed everything. And do you know who gave you the strength to keep trying? Jennifer continued. Do you know who believed in you when no one else did? It was me, the poor sales clerk from Chinatown. The silence in the room was almost palpable. Brandon felt like he was watching family secrets being revealed that he perhaps shouldn't be hearing. Maybe I should go, he said quietly. No. Madison held his arm. You're a part of this now. You need to stay. Richard finally sat down heavily in his chair, seeming to have aged 10 years in a few minutes. This changes nothing, he murmured. The situation is different. How is it different? Jennifer asked, moving closer to the table. Because now we're the ones with money. Does that give us the right to treat other people badly? It's not that, it's exactly that, Richard. You've become the same person who humiliated you in the past. Jennifer's words hit Richard like a punch to the stomach. He looked at Brandon, really seeing him for the first time. The young man had simple but clean clothes, a respectful posture despite all the humiliation, and was clearly trying to protect Madison even at the risk of his own safety. Brandon, Richard said finally, his voice lower, tell me about yourself, about your family. Brandon took a deep breath before answering. Mr. Sullivan, I'm 24 years old. My mother, Mrs. Margaret, has worked as a housekeeper since my father died when I was 15. I have an 18-year-old sister, Ashley, who's in her last year of high school, and a 16-year-old brother, Jacob, who's also a student. I work in the mornings as an administrative assistant at an accounting firm and in the afternoons as a delivery driver for a diner. I'm studying business administration at night at a private college, paying with a partial scholarship. And how did you meet my daughter? Richard asked, his tone less aggressive but still suspicious. I was doing a college project about corporate social responsibility. I needed to interview people who worked with community projects. I went to my neighborhood's community center, and there I found Madison teaching children how to read. Madison smiled through her tears, remembering that day. He showed up all formal with a questionnaire in his hand, she added. I thought he was from some company wanting to do advertising. I almost sent him away. Why were you doing volunteer work, Madison? Jennifer asked her daughter. Because I was tired of my empty life, Mom. Tired of going to the mall, traveling, going to parties where people only talk about money and gossip. I wanted to do something that had meaning. Richard watched his daughter with a strange expression on his face, as if he were seeing her for the first time. And you never told him who our family was? He asked. Never. I introduced myself just as Madison. I made up that I studied education at a public college and that I lived in a rental with a friend. Why? Because I wanted him to like me for who I am, not for what I have. Brandon squeezed Madison's hand again. And I like you exactly for who you are, for the way you treat the children, how you care about others, how you laugh when you're truly happy. That's very beautiful, Jennifer said, wiping her own eyes. But what now? How do you two plan to move forward? I don't know, Mom. It depends on Dad. All eyes turned to Richard, who was clearly wrestling with his own thoughts and emotions. Richard, Jennifer approached and touched his shoulder gently. Remember when your father said I would never be good enough for you? Remember how you felt? I remember, he replied quietly. And remember how you promised me you would never do to our children what he did to us. Richard closed his eyes, the memories coming back with full force. He remembered perfectly the pain and humiliation he had felt, the anger he had toward his own father for not being able to see beyond appearances. Dad, Madison approached cautiously, I know you want to protect me. I know you're afraid people will take advantage of me. But Brandon isn't like that. Spend some time with him. Get to know the real him. How can I trust him? Richard asked, still resisting. The same way you asked your father to trust you, Jennifer replied. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Brandon took a step forward, knowing it was time to speak for himself. Mr. Sullivan, I completely understand your concern. If I had a daughter, I'd want to protect her too. But I can prove to you that my intentions are honest. How? Give me a chance, a real chance. Not as a candidate for your company, because I know that would be complicated now, but as a person. Let me show you who I really am." Richard looked at the young man for a long moment, weighing his words. "And what if I say no? If I forbid Madison from seeing you?" "Then I will respect your decision," Brandon replied, surprising everyone. "I won't force anything. I won't try to convince Madison to disobey you. If you truly believe I'm a bad person for your daughter, then maybe you're right." Madison looked at Brandon with surprise and panic. "Brandon, you can't be serious." "I am serious, Madison. I love you too much to be the cause of problems between you and your family." That answer took Richard completely by surprise. He expected the young man to argue, fight, maybe even threaten, but Brandon was willing to give up the love of his life to avoid causing her suffering. "This is crazy," Madison exploded. "Dad, I won't accept this. If you forbid me from seeing Brandon, I'll leave home." "Madison," Brandon tried to calm her. "No, Brandon, I won't let my father destroy our happiness because of prejudice." She turned to Richard. "Dad, I'm 25 years old. I have a degree, I'm intelligent, capable of making my own decisions, and I choose Brandon." "And if I disown you?" Richard asked, testing her. "Then I'll work. I'll support myself. I don't need your money to be happy." "You don't know what it's like to have no money, Madison," Richard said sadly. "You've always had everything." "Then maybe it's time for me to learn," she replied with determination. Jennifer watched the argument with a heavy heart. She was seeing her family fall apart right before her eyes. "Richard, please," she begged, "don't do this. Don't destroy our family out of pride. It's not pride, Jennifer, it's protection." "Protection from what? From her being happy? From her finding someone who truly loves her?" At that moment, the living room door opened again, and Jessica entered hesitantly. "Mr. Sullivan, sorry to interrupt, but there's a gentleman here who says it's urgent. He says he's related to the young man." Brandon turned pale. "Related to me? Who?" "He said he's your uncle, Mr. Brandon." Brandon exchanged a worried look with Madison. His Uncle Robert rarely left the neighborhood, let alone came downtown. "Send him in," Richard said, curious to see what kind of family Brandon had. Robert Miller entered the room a few minutes later, visibly nervous and out of place in the elegant setting. He was a man of about 50, with simple clothes and a hat in his hands. "Good afternoon," he greeted timidly. "Sorry to intrude, but I need to speak with my nephew." "Uncle Robert, what are you doing here?" Brandon approached, worried. "Brandon, my boy, your mother is not well. She fainted at work and is in the hospital." Brandon's blood ran cold. "What? What do you mean?" "The doctors said it was from working too much and eating too little. She didn't want anyone to know, but she was even skimping on her own food to pay your college tuition." Brandon felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. Madison immediately held his arm to support him. "Which hospital?" he asked, already heading for the door. "Mercy General Hospital. But Brandon, you need to know. The doctors said she needs some expensive tests and I'll figure it out, Uncle. Let's go." "Wait," Richard said suddenly. Everyone looked at him. "What is your mother's full name?" "Margaret Miller Johnson, sir." Richard picked up the phone on his desk and dialed a number. "Dr. Reynolds? It's Richard Sullivan. I need you to go to Mercy General Hospital right now and take care of a patient named Margaret Miller Johnson. Do all the necessary tests and don't worry about costs. You can charge everything to my personal account." Brandon looked at Richard with disbelief. "Mr. Sullivan, I can't accept—" "It's not for you," Richard said curtly. "It's for your mother. A woman who is going hungry to see her son study doesn't deserve to suffer." Tears began to stream down Brandon's face. I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Go take care of your mother." Brandon nodded and headed for the door with his uncle, but before leaving, he turned to Madison. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too," she replied. "Everything will be okay." After they left, silence filled the room again. "Why did you do that?" Jennifer asked her husband. "Because no mother should go hungry to see her son study," Richard answered, his voice choked. "And what about Brandon and Madison?" Richard sighed deeply. I don't know, Jennifer. I need to think. Dad, Madison approached. Thank you for what you did for Brandon's mother. That means so much to me. Madison, are you sure about your feelings? Absolutely. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Richard looked at his daughter, seeing the determination in her eyes. It was the same determination Jennifer had shown years ago when she stood up to his family so they could be together. All right, he said finally. Here's what we'll do. I'll give Brandon a chance. A real chance. But with conditions. What conditions? Madison asked cautiously. First, I want to get to know him better. I want to have dinner with you both, talk to him without all this tension. Second, if you really want to be together, you have to do it properly, no hiding, no lies. And third, Jennifer asked, knowing her husband well. Third, he's going to work for me. What do you mean? Madison looked confused. If he wants to be part of this family, he needs to show he can build something for himself. I'll give him a position at the company, but he'll have to prove his worth like any other employee. Madison smiled, but also looked worried. Dad, do you promise you'll give him a fair chance, that you won't sabotage him? Richard looked at his daughter and his wife, seeing the hope in both their eyes. I promise, he said finally, but he also has to promise he'll prove himself worthy of our family. I'm sure he will, Madison said, hugging her father for the first time in a long while. 2 weeks later, Brandon was back in Richard's office, but this time for a very different conversation. Mrs. Margaret had made a full recovery, thanks to the medical care Richard had arranged, and Brandon had spent the last few days taking care of her and thinking about everything that had happened. How is your mother? Richard asked as Brandon sat down in front of his desk. Much better, sir. The doctor said she's fully recovered. I wanted to thank you again for what you did. No need to thank me. As I said, it was for her, not for you. Brandon nodded, understanding. Mr. Sullivan, Madison told me about your proposal, about working at the company. And what do you think? I think it's an amazing opportunity, but I also know it won't be easy. I imagine a lot of people at the company will know who I am and why I'm there. Probably, Richard confirmed. Are you prepared for that? I am, but I have one condition. Richard raised an eyebrow, surprised by the young man's courage. What condition? I want to start from scratch in the lowest possible position. I don't want anyone to think I'm here because of Madison. I want to earn my place. Richard studied Brandon's face for a long moment. That will mean working twice as hard. It will mean proving your worth every single day. It will mean some people will try to bring you down. I understand. And it will mean I'll be harder on you than on any other employee. Because if you're going to date my daughter, I need to be absolutely sure you're the right man for her. I expect nothing less from you. In fact, I demand it. Richard smiled for the first time since he'd met Brandon. All right, you start Monday as an administrative assistant in the logistics department, trainee salary, full-time hours, and no special treatment. Perfect. But Brandon, Richard leaned forward, if you hurt my daughter, if you disappoint her in any way, I will destroy you. Understood? Understood perfectly, sir. And if I hurt her, you will have every right to do so. The two men looked at each other with mutual respect for the first time. Now, there's one more thing, Richard said. I want you and Madison to come over for dinner on Saturday. I want my wife to get to know you better, and I want you to get to know our family the right way. It would be an honor, Mr. Sullivan. And Brandon? Yes, sir? You can call me Richard. After all, if all goes well, we'll be family. Brandon smiled, feeling a mix of relief and nervousness. Thank you, Richard. I won't let you down. I hope not, because Madison means everything to me and Jennifer. She's our only daughter, our whole life. And that's exactly why I'll take very good care of her. I promise. The following months were full of hard work and adjustment for Brandon. As promised, Richard gave him no special treatment, and on several occasions was even more demanding. Brandon arrived early, left late, and dedicated himself completely to every task he was given. At first, some employees looked at him with curiosity and whispered when he passed by. Everyone knew he was dating the boss's daughter, but Brandon quickly proved he was there on his own merit. "Good work on the logistics report," his supervisor Kevin said one morning. "You found some flaws that no one had noticed before." "Thank you, Kevin. I'm just trying to do my best." "You're doing more than that. You're impressing a lot of people around here." Brandon smiled. It was rewarding to know he was being recognized for his work, not for his relationship with the owner's family. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. In the evenings, Brandon and Madison would regularly meet for dinner or just to talk. Their relationship had deepened even further since everything had been resolved with Richard. "How was work today?" Madison asked during dinner at a small diner that had become their favorite spot. "Very good. Your father gave me more responsibilities. I'm now helping coordinate deliveries for the southern region." "He likes your work," Madison smiled. "Yesterday he told Mom that you have a lot of potential." "Really?" Brandon was genuinely surprised. "Really? But don't tell him I told you. He doesn't like to praise people to their faces." Brandon laughed. "Your father is an interesting man. Strict, but fair. He's always been like that. Very demanding, but when he trusts someone, he really trusts them. And your mother, how is she handling all this?" "My mother adores you," Madison said, her eyes shining. "She said you remind her of my father when they were young. Determined, hard-working, not afraid of challenges." Brandon took Madison's hand on the table. "I still can't believe we managed to overcome all that. For a moment I thought I was going to lose you forever." "Never," Madison said firmly. "I knew that if you two really got to know each other, you'd end up respecting each other." "Your father is a good man, Madison. He was just trying to protect you." "I know, and you're an even better man for understanding that." They continued talking about their plans for the future, about the dreams they shared. Brandon had moved to a small but decent apartment closer to work and was helping his siblings with their studies. Ashley had gotten a scholarship to study business at the same college Brandon had attended, and Jacob was preparing for his college entrance exam. "And Mrs. Margaret, how is she?" Madison asked. "My mother is doing great. She got a better job at a cleaning company that pays better and offers benefits. And you know what's funniest?" "What?" "She's dating." "Really?" Madison smiled excitedly. "Tell me everything." "It's Mr. Harold, the owner of the bakery in our neighborhood. They've known each other for years, but only recently got close for real. My mother is radiant." "How wonderful. Love at any age, right?" "Exactly," Brandon agreed. "Speaking of love." He suddenly got nervous, fumbling with his suit pocket. "What is it?" Madison asked, noticing the change in his behavior. "Madison, these past few months have been the best of my life. Not just because of the job or your family's approval, but mostly because of you." "Brandon." "Let me finish," he gently interrupted. "You made me believe I can be anything, that I can achieve any dream. You gave me a new family, a new perspective on life, and I want to spend the rest of my life making it up to you." Brandon rose from his chair and knelt beside the table, pulling a small box from his pocket. The entire restaurant fell silent, watching the scene. "Madison Sullivan, will you marry me?" Madison put her hands to her face, tears of happiness streaming from her eyes. "Brandon, oh my God, yes, of course yes." The entire restaurant burst into applause as Brandon slipped the ring onto Madison's finger. It was a simple ring, but chosen with great love and within Brandon's financial means. "It's perfect," Madison whispered, admiring the ring. "It's not very fancy," Brandon said, still somewhat nervous. "It's perfect because it came from you," she replied, kissing him softly. They returned to Madison's home that night, eager to share the news with her parents. Richard and Jennifer were in the living room watching television when they arrived. "How was dinner?" Jennifer asked, immediately noticing their excitement. "It was wonderful," Madison replied, extending her hand to show the ring. Jennifer screamed with happiness and jumped off the sofa to hug her daughter. Richard rose more slowly, processing the news. "When did you buy this ring?" he asked Brandon. "A few weeks ago, sir. I've been taking on some extra weekend projects to save up money." "And you didn't think you should ask for my permission first?" Brandon's heart nearly stopped. Did Richard still have problems with their relationship? I thought that... Richard started laughing. I'm joking, son. Of course you have my blessing. Brandon sighed with relief, and Richard hugged him for the first time. Welcome officially to the family, Brandon. Thank you, Richard. I promise I'll make Madison very happy. I know you will, and if you don't, I can still fire you, Richard joked, making everyone laugh. They spent the rest of the evening planning the wedding and talking about the future. Brandon insisted he wanted to pay for the reception, even if it was something simple, but Richard and Jennifer wouldn't hear of it. Brandon, Jennifer said as they were saying goodbye, you may not have been born into our family, but you're part of it now. And in a family, we help each other. Thank you, Jennifer. You don't know what this means to me. 6 months later, the wedding took place in a beautiful ceremony at the church in the neighborhood where Brandon had grown up. He insisted it be there so all his friends and neighbors could attend. Mrs. Margaret cried with emotion seeing her son go to the altar. She looked elegant in a new dress that Jennifer had insisted on buying for her, and beside her was Mr. Harold, who had also become part of the family. You look beautiful, my daughter, Richard told Madison before walking her down the aisle. Your father is very proud of you. Thank you, Dad, for everything, for letting me choose my own path. Thank you for teaching me that sometimes the father needs to learn from his daughter. When Richard gave Madison away to Brandon at the altar, he whispered, "Take good care of her." "Always," Brandon replied. The ceremony was moving, but what stood out most to everyone present was the speech Brandon gave during the reception. "When I met Madison," he said, holding his wife's hand, "I was going through a very difficult time in my life. Working so hard, studying, trying to support my family, and thinking I'd never be able to get out of the situation I was in. And then this wonderful woman appeared who was doing volunteer work in my neighborhood, helping kids learn to read, and I thought, what a special person. I never imagined she would fall in love with me. But what impressed me most about Madison wasn't when I found out she came from a wealthy family. It was when she told me she was willing to give all that up for me. That's when I realized she loved me for who I am, not for what I have. And today I want to especially thank Richard and Jennifer." Brandon looked at his in-laws, "for giving me a chance, for being open-minded enough to look beyond appearances. Richard, I know it wasn't easy for you to accept a poor son-in-law, but you showed that a real man is capable of changing his mind when he realizes he was wrong." Richard became emotional and nodded at Brandon, clearly touched by the words. "And most of all," Brandon continued, "I want to promise everyone here that I will spend my entire life being worthy of the trust you've placed in me. I will love and protect Madison until my last day, and I will always remember where I came from so I never forget the value of life's simple things." The speech ended with emotional applause from everyone present. It was impossible not to be moved seeing how that story, which began with so much humiliation, had turned into a beautiful tale of love and overcoming adversity. During the party, Richard approached Brandon. "That was a very beautiful speech, son. Thank you, I spoke from the heart. I could tell. And I want to tell you something. You've taught me some important lessons these past few months." "How so?" "You taught me that a person's true worth isn't in what they have, but in who they are. You taught me that sometimes prejudice blinds us to wonderful people right in front of us. And you taught me that a father sometimes needs to trust his daughter's heart, even when he doesn't understand her choices." Brandon was moved by his father-in-law's words. "Richard, you've taught me a lot too. You taught me that a man can change his mind without losing his dignity. You taught me that family is something you build, not just something you're born into. And you taught me that sometimes people act badly, not out of malice, but out of fear." The two men embraced, and Richard whispered, "Now you're truly my son, Brandon. And you're the father I never had." The party continued late into the night, with lots of music, dancing, and joy. It was impossible to imagine that just a few months earlier, those same people had been fighting and humiliating each other. Mrs. Margaret and Jennifer became great friends, exchanging recipes and stories about their children. Brandon's siblings were welcomed by the Sullivan family, as if they were grandchildren, and Richard even offered them internships at the company when they finished their studies. Aunt Jennifer, Ashley, Brandon's sister, said during the party, "Thank you for making my brother so happy." "It wasn't me, dear," Jennifer replied. "It was Madison and Brandon himself. I just learned to recognize a good person when I see one." 2 years later, Brandon had been promoted to logistics supervisor and was enrolled in graduate school for business management, paid for by the company. Madison was 4 months pregnant, and the couple lived in a comfortable house they had bought with their parents' help. "How does it feel being a supervisor?" Madison asked one night as they had dinner at home. "Still kind of surreal," Brandon admitted. "Sometimes I look around and can't believe how much my life has changed. It changed because you deserved it. You worked so hard to get where you are." "And you? Don't you regret marrying a poor kid from the ghetto?" Brandon asked playfully. "Never," Madison replied, kissing him. "I married a decent, hard-working man who truly loves me and who happens to not be poor anymore." Brandon laughed. "That's right. Now we're lower middle class." "We're lower middle class with lots of love," Madison corrected. "And with a baby on the way," Brandon added, placing his hand on his wife's stomach. "Do you think it'll be a boy or a girl?" "It doesn't matter. I just want them to be healthy and to grow up knowing that it doesn't matter where you come from. It matters where you want to go. And that love overcomes any prejudice," Madison finished. "Exactly." They stayed embraced on the couch, planning the future and remembering the past. It was incredible how a simple job interview had changed so many people's lives. Richard, for his part, had completely changed his hiring policy at the company. Now he gave preference to talented young people from less fortunate backgrounds, offering scholarships and professional development programs. "Why this change in company policy?" a journalist asked during an interview about social responsibility. "Because I realized I was missing out on great talents because of my own prejudices," Richard answered honestly. "My son-in-law taught me that a person's potential has nothing to do with their bank account." The company flourished with the new vision, even receiving awards for its inclusive practices. And Brandon became the symbol of this transformation, being invited to speak at universities about overcoming adversity and opportunities. "What would you say to a poor young person who is feeling discouraged?" a student asked during one of these talks. "I'd say don't let anyone convince you that you're worth less because of your background," Brandon answered. "I grew up hearing that people like me would never amount to anything in life, that our place was to serve the rich, not compete with them. But I found out that's a lie." "And how did you stay motivated?" "By always remembering my goals. I wanted to give a better life for my mother and my siblings. I wanted to prove that I was capable. And most of all, I wanted to be worthy of the love of the woman I loved. And today, what motivates you the most?" "Today, I'm motivated by knowing that my story can inspire other people. Knowing that my son or daughter will grow up in a world where opportunities are more fair, and to continue proving every day that I deserve to be where I am." The talk ended with a round of applause, and Brandon felt fulfilled knowing his experience could help others. When he got home that night, he found Madison waiting for him with news. "The doctor confirmed it today," she said, smiling. "We're having twins." Brandon picked her up and spun her around the room, both laughing with happiness. "Twins," he repeated, still processing the news. "2 babies." "2 babies," Madison confirmed. "A boy and a girl." "Perfect," Brandon said, kissing his wife. "A complete family. And have you thought about names yet?" "How about Hope and Future?" Brandon joked. "Are you crazy?" Madison laughed. "How about Margaret and Richard?" Brandon was moved by the suggestion. "Honoring your mother and my father? That would be perfect." "Then it's decided. Margaret and Richard Miller Sullivan." They spent the rest of the night talking about preparations for the twins, about how they would raise the children, about the values they wanted to pass on. "I want them to grow up knowing that family has nothing to do with money," Brandon said. "I want them to be simple, humble people, but also confident and determined. And I want them to know that prejudice exists, but it can be overcome with persistence and character," Madison added. "Exactly. And most of all, I want them to know that true love doesn't see social class, color, or background. It only sees the person's heart." 6 months later, Margaret and Richard were born healthy and brought even more joy to the family. The grandparents were overjoyed with happiness, especially Richard, who couldn't stop holding his little grandson in his arms. "Who would have thought I'd be a grandfather before 60?" he commented during the children's baptism. "And who would have thought I'd be the father-in-law of a kid from the ghetto?" he added, looking at Brandon affectionately. "Life is full of surprises, isn't it?" Brandon replied. "The best surprises," Richard agreed. During the baptism party, Jennifer gave an emotional speech. "When I first met Brandon," she said, "I saw in him the same determination I had when I was young, the same will to succeed in life, the same courage to face prejudice. And today, seeing these two beautiful babies, I see the future of our family. These grandchildren will grow up knowing that the most important thing in life isn't where you come from, but what kind of person you choose to be. They'll grow up in a family where love overcame all differences, where respect defeated prejudice, and they'll grow up knowing that when two people truly love each other, nothing can separate them. Not money, not social class, not other people's opinions." The grandmother's speech ended with tears of emotion from everyone present, and Brandon held Madison's hand firmly, thinking about how their lives had completely changed since that terrible day in the meeting room. "Can you believe it all started with you humiliating me in an interview?" Brandon whispered to Richard. "Sometimes the worst situations lead to the best outcomes," Richard replied wisely. "If I hadn't been such a jerk that day, maybe you two would never have come out as a couple." "That's true," Madison agreed. "In a way, Daddy's prejudice ended up bringing us even closer together." "And it taught me to be a better person," Richard added. So in the end, everyone won. 5 years had passed since that first stormy encounter. Brandon was now a regional manager at the company and had finished an MBA. Madison had returned to volunteer work, now coordinating an education program for underprivileged youth funded by her father's company. The twins were 4 years old and were the joy of the family. Margaret was a smart and determined girl like her mother, while Richard Jr. was an affectionate and observant boy like his father. "Daddy, why does Grandma Margaret work in a different house than ours?" little Margaret asked one day. Brandon and Madison exchanged a look. It was the first time the children had asked questions about the social differences that existed in the family. "Because everyone has a different job, my dear," Brandon explained. "Grandma Margaret helps take care of other people's houses, just like Daddy helps take care of Grandpa Richard's company." "But her house is smaller than ours," Richard Jr. observed. "That's true," Madison said, "but that doesn't mean she's worth less than us. It just means she chose a simpler life. And simplicity isn't a flaw," Brandon added. "Sometimes the simplest people are the happiest." "Like you and Mommy when you met?" Margaret asked, as she always loved hearing her parents' story. "Exactly," Brandon smiled. "Daddy didn't have much money, but he was very happy because he loved Mommy." "And Mommy was happy because she loved Daddy," Madison finished. "And now we're all happy together," the children said in unison, as they always did when they heard this story. These conversations became frequent as the children grew and began to notice the nuances of the world around them. Brandon and Madison made sure to always be honest about their story, about the difficulties they faced, and about the lessons they learned. "I want our children to grow up aware of their own privileges," Madison said one night as they were putting the children to bed. "But I also want you to appreciate what we've achieved," Brandon added. "To understand that everything we have today was earned through hard work and respect. And most importantly, that you never feel superior to anyone because of what you have. Exactly. That you judge people by their character, not their bank account." Richard had become an extremely devoted grandfather, spending lots of time with his grandchildren and telling stories about his own mistakes and lessons learned. "Grandpa," Richard Jr. asked during one of these moments, "is it true you didn't like Daddy when he met Mommy?" Richard grew thoughtful for a moment before answering, "It's true, my grandson. Grandpa made a very ugly mistake back then." "What mistake?" "I judged Daddy by the clothes he wore and the money he had, not by the kind of person he was." "And why did you do that?" "Because I had forgotten what it was like to be young and without money. I had forgotten that I too was once judged in the same unfair way." "And what did you learn?" "I learned that the best people sometimes come in simple packaging. I learned that a person's heart is more important than the size of their wallet." "And what else?" "I learned that a father sometimes needs to trust his daughter's wisdom, even when he doesn't understand her choices at first. The children always came away from these talks with a greater understanding of fairness, respect, and equality. It was heartwarming to see how they absorbed these values and applied them in their own interactions with other children. The teacher said a new boy started at school, Margaret reported during dinner. He's from a poor family and some boys are being mean to him. And what did you do? Brandon asked. I asked him to play with me at recess, and I told the other boys that being poor isn't a flaw. Very good, my daughter, Madison smiled proudly. You did the right thing. That's how it's done, Richard Jr. agreed. Daddy always says we have to be kind to everyone. Exactly, Brandon confirmed. And do you know why? Because everyone deserves respect, both children answered together. Moments like these filled Brandon and Madison with pride, knowing they were successfully passing the right values onto their children. 10 years had passed since the wedding, and the family was completely settled. Brandon was now the chief operations officer of the company and had become a reference in the industry on social inclusion. Madison ran a foundation that offered scholarships to underprivileged youth. Dad, Richard Jr., now 9 years old, said during a Sunday lunch, I want to work at Grandpa's company when I grow up. And why do you want that? Brandon asked. Because I want to help other people like you do. I want to give opportunities to those who don't have any. That's very beautiful, son. But remember that to work at the company, you'll have to study hard and put in a lot of effort. I know, and I don't want anyone to think I'm there just because I'm your son. Brandon and Madison exchanged a surprised look. It was incredible how the boy already had that awareness at 9 years old. What do you mean? Madison asked. I want to earn my place like Daddy earned his. I want people to respect me for what I do, not for who my family is. Richard, who was present at the lunch, was moved by his grandson's words. My grandson, he said. You are speaking like a true man. Your father would be proud to hear that. Daddy is right here, Grandpa. Margaret pointed at Brandon, making everyone laugh. It's true, Richard smiled, and he is already proud. We all are. Margaret, in turn, had developed a special interest in early childhood education, always helping the younger children at school, and dreaming of becoming a teacher when she grew up. Mom, she said, I want to teach poor children like you used to before you had me. And why do you want that, my daughter? Because every child deserves to learn, and I want them to know they can be anything they want, even if they don't have money. That's wonderful, Margaret, but you know being a teacher isn't easy, right? I know, but Daddy always says the things worth having never come easy. Brandon was moved to see how his own life philosophy was being passed to the next generation. 15 years after that first stormy meeting, the family gathered to celebrate Brandon's graduation from a specialization course in human resources management. Another diploma, Jennifer joked. You never stop studying. There's always something new to learn, Brandon replied. And the more I learn, the better I can do my job. And the better you can help other people, Mrs. Margaret added. She was now 70 years old, retired, but still active and very proud of her son. Exactly, Mom. Every new thing I learn lets me help more people have the opportunities I had. Speaking of opportunities, Richard interjected, I have a proposal for you, Brandon. What proposal? I want you to take over the vice presidency of the company. Silence fell over the room. Brandon was completely surprised by the offer. Richard, I don't know what to say. Say you accept, Madison encouraged him, taking his hand. But what about you? You're not ready to retire yet. I'm not retiring, but I'm getting older, and I want to make sure the company is in good hands when the time comes. And I'm those good hands? You're the best hands, Richard confirmed. In 15 years, you've proven to be not just an excellent professional, but a person of integrity who never forgot where you came from. Besides, Jennifer added, you completely transformed the company culture. Today, we're recognized nationally for our social inclusion programs. Brandon looked around the table, seeing the faces of all the people he loved encouraging him to accept. All right, he said finally, I accept, but on one condition. What? Richard asked. I want to implement an even bigger scholarship program. I want the company to become a national leader in providing opportunities for underprivileged youth. Approved, Richard smiled. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. The celebration went on into the night, with the whole family gathered to celebrate another achievement in Brandon's journey. Mrs. Margaret couldn't stop crying with pride, remembering the hard times when they barely had enough to eat. "Son," she said as they were saying goodbye, "your father would be so proud to see the man you've become." "I'm proud too, Mom. Proud to have learned from you the true values of life. And now you're passing those values to your children, and they'll pass them to their children. That's the greatest legacy a person can leave." Brandon hugged his mother, thinking about how his life had completely transformed since that day. He walked into a meeting room expecting just a job opportunity. Now, at 40 years old, he was vice president of a thriving company, had a beautiful family, a comfortable home, and most importantly, he had helped hundreds of young people have the same opportunities he had. "What are you thinking about?" Madison asked when they got home. "I'm thinking how different our story could have been if your father hadn't changed his mind that day." "But he did change it," Madison smiled. "And do you know why? Because you didn't give up on me. Not just that, because you showed you were worth not giving up on. Because you proved that love and determination can overcome any obstacle." Brandon kissed his wife gently. "And because you gave me the courage to be better than I ever thought I could be." "We made each other better," Madison corrected. "And now we're making our children better too. And our children will make the world better." "Exactly." They stayed embraced on their home's balcony, looking at the stars and thinking about the future. About all the opportunities they would still create, all the lives they would still touch, all the love they would still spread. The story that began with humiliation and prejudice had transformed into a beautiful saga of love, overcoming, and social change. And most importantly, this story was far from over, because every day Brandon and Madison continued building a legacy of hope and opportunities for the next generations. Years later, when Margaret and Richard Jr. were already grown adults working in the family business, they would often tell their own children the story of how their parents met. "And so," Margaret would always conclude, "we learned that prejudice may try to separate us, but true love always finds a way to bring the right people together. And that it doesn't matter where you come from," Richard Jr. would add, "what matters is what kind of person you choose to be." And this wisdom, passed down from generation to generation, continued making a difference in many people's lives, proving that a single love story can transform not just two families, but an entire community. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this moving story. Do you believe prejudice can be overcome by true love? Leave your opinion in the comments and share similar experiences you know of. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one.